This episode is sponsored by Wix Studio.
When is the last time you listened to a podcast about web development, web design, and small business and didn't fall asleep? Yes, we cover web development, web design, and small business, but like actual human beings with personalities. If you're a beginner, we're not going to talk over your head. It's more like asking your buddy for help. We have guests, we have fun, and let me tell you, these two can get off on a tangent. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to HTML All the Things Podcast. This is Matt Lawrence and Mike Curran.
That's it, everybody. We are back. This is the HTML All Things Podcast. This episode is titled Developers Hate Technical Debt. This is going to be an overview of the Stack Overflow Survey 2024. So 65,437 developers answered this survey done by Stack Overflow, and we're going to go over a whole bunch of stuff, including the tech that people use, how they sort of self-identify, like are you full stack, back end, front end, etc. There's going to be some AI stuff in there because everything's AI powered. And then we're also going to go through just to touch on a couple of the frustrations that developers have as per the answers answered in this survey. So Mike, you went ahead and gathered some of the information. Obviously, this survey is quite extensive and there's basically pretty much a whole website for it. So, we didn't, take absolutely everything from the survey, but why don't you, get us started, kick us off here, because you gathered the graphs that you thought were interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And this survey, I think, is one of the more important surveys throughout the year. There's like an awards survey before where like people award different frameworks and libraries and people in the industry. And that survey is pretty important too. But this one kind of, first of all, it's way more people. So 65,000 developers, like you said, Matt. And it also does some pretty granular things that we'll get into that really show a good picture, a good snapshot of the industry in that year. So it's been going on for many years now. And because it's been going on for many years, there's a lot of data points to compare it to, which is another key thing. So I think it's important to talk about because people that are just getting into the industry, it's important to know what's up. People that have been in the industry for a while, we're going to kind of give our opinions on a bunch of different things that came up here. That, first of all, some were pretty predictable, but some were kind of interesting. Like I didn't expect that. And that's kind of why I wanted to do this episode on it this year. But just to give a clear picture, I just took like a quote from the Stack Overflow website about what the survey is, and it's about coding, the technologies and tools they use and want to learn, AI, and developer experience at work. So it's all about developers. Developers are the ones mostly answering. There are some people that are answering that are like developer managers that don't do a lot of coding, and there's also people that are not like currently working but are learning to code. Those are the kinds of people that answer the survey. And if you want to get super granular, we'll have the link survey.stackoverflow.co/2024 in the show notes. And you can go in and there's tons and tons of charts, really interesting, broken down by different like professional developers, learning to code developers, other coders. Like there's a bunch of different things that break it down more granularly than what we'll be talking about in this episode. But just to dive right into the first topic that we're going to be talking about, which is going to be tech. So like especially specifically going to be web tech. We'll touch a little bit on other stuff, but the most popular technologies of 2024 according to the survey. This one's interesting to me, not because of like the thing that's at the top, which is JavaScript. So this is kind of makes sense. The second most popular technology is a little bit interesting, which is HTML and CSS. So this is obviously it's not just programming languages. HTML and CSS are more markup languages, but there's still a lot of programming involved in them. And that's the second most popular language among all the different developers out there that have took this survey. I found that kind of interesting. The third thing is Python. Fourth language is a query language, SQL. Then there's TypeScript, which is again a subset essentially of JavaScript or a superset, whatever you want to call it. And then there's Bash/Shell, which is essentially like scripting, writing, CLI tools, scripts for the CLI, like for terminals and stuff like that. And then the next one here, I won't go through all of them, is Java. But dominantly, I would say very dominantly, we have JavaScript sitting on top at 62.3% of people using it. So I don't know, like it makes sense because the web touches everything and it's only grown year over year, right? Like the capabilities of the web, especially. But on the other hand, I was expecting, I don't know, like I'm expecting an incumbent to come up at some point, and I don't have a good one. I guess Python is the incumbent, and it's in third place, pretty squarely in third place. But I'm sure like it's not even touching HTML and CSS. Like HTML and CSS are more popular than Python according to the survey.
Why do you think that is? I'm kind of leaning more toward a lot of people will say to learn the foundational tech like we do. And if anyone is still in the learning phase, especially if they've just exited it, like HTML and CSS is so paramount to what they've learned. Like it's such a big piece of what they've learned so far that they would answer this survey like this, right?
I guess so. Yeah, like this is like it's their most popular like technology that they're using, I guess. But the weird thing to me is that if you're getting into coding, not web development, right? And you're talking about foundational technologies, I would say like HTML and CSS and JavaScript even aren't the best languages for coding, right? Like if you're just trying to become a programmer, a general programmer in anything, because they're so kind of loosey-goosey, because like obviously JavaScript is there's no types unless you add TypeScript, which is a whole other thing. There's no compiler. So like all your errors that you write are just going to end up being run and then hit. You can't really tell if an error is in your code. So for a new developer, a lot of that is actually like a detriment to their initial experience. Like you want rails, right? Like you want guardrails when you're learning. And the worry that I have is that it's so popular, JavaScript is so popular that we don't have a lot of foundational developers coming up anymore. We just have like JavaScript developers, which is fine, but to write really safe and like long running code, and especially the capabilities of JavaScript going up every year. Like, for example, a lot of apps are now going towards something called like a local first mentality or local first framework. This is something that's been around for a while, but stuff like linear or most of the to-do list apps that you have on there, like the reason that they run so quickly is that they do a bunch of syncing in the background. And so essentially you're doing everything locally. And then there's like this middleware layer that takes everything that you do locally and then syncs it with your database, which is a very similar experience to how like a mobile app works. And that's why they're so snappy. But like this is a very complicated concept, and doing it correctly and executing on that is actually not super straightforward. Like there are tools that can help you, but regardless of that, and I worry that because JavaScript is so dominant for so many years, that people just haven't had experience with other languages that do stuff better than JavaScript and are relying on JavaScript too heavily, if that makes sense. HTML and CSS is a whole other thing. Like I don't really understand how that's second, but like you mentioned, Matt, it's probably something to do with the fact that people are just, I guess, interfacing with the web a ton, and they have to be able to visually create those UIs. So it's got to be up there because of that.
Well, like I mentioned, the people learning, but also, JavaScript itself is rather popular among people who have already learned, the experienced developers. And so, if my theory is correct, then it's additive in that way, right? Where JavaScript would win out because the HTML and CSS would be largely hypothetically influenced by the junior dev, let's say, or the aspiring junior dev. And then JavaScript would be, kind of pumped up by those people, the junior dev and the aspiring, but also just the devs at senior level, at, mid-level, whatever you want to call them. There's a couple of exceptions there. Like 2013 and 2014, SQL was the most popular language. But every other year since the survey was run, it's been JavaScript, which is, I would like to see, I'm sure we could pull it up, not right now, but I'm sure we could pull up the data there and run some numbers on where HTML and CSS sat. There's probably a lot of insights in the order of more than just the top two positions, which is what we've more or less been talking about. But there's definitely going to be some, there's going to be some interesting data there, like where was HTML, where was, SQL sort of when it won those 2 years and things like that.
Yeah, there's definitely some really interesting data you could pull out from the history of this survey. But to move on a little bit, we're going to talk more about web frameworks now. So this next one is specifically web frameworks and technologies. So the most popular web frameworks and technologies. And the first one here is Node.js, which it makes sense. It's the backend Java. I guess to kind of piggyback on the previous point, because JavaScript is a popular language in general in this survey, it makes sense that the most popular framework for JavaScript would be the most like overall used thing ever, which would be like the Node.js, which is the backend scripting language for it. The next, like a close second to it, is still React, which I think has been the case for a very long time and hasn't really budged. So like people were saying React's dying. React's definitely not dying. It's still very, very popular in terms of frameworks. It's not going anywhere, it seems, with the adoption rate that it has. And third here is jQuery. I mean, I guess like this is legacy stuff. And we'll talk a little bit at the end of this show about legacy things and what impact that has on developers. So I guess this kind of makes sense, again, to the later point. But like jQuery being so high up here definitely shows that people are reluctant to move on from older technologies when they still work just fine for the projects that they have. Or they work, they don't break their projects. Whether they work just fine is a different question. And then just to round it out a little bit, there's Next.js right after jQuery, Express, which is a framework on top of Node.js, Angular, which is another framework. So like, and that's a more legacy one too. So it goes all the way down. I added the last one here, which is like probably 10 or 15 down, my favorite framework, which is Svelte, with only 6.5% of users saying that it's the most popular or the one that they use most often. So I guess whether it's growing or not is a question, but it's definitely not going to reach React levels, I don't think, ever. We can be pretty confident about that, in my opinion, with this kind of survey and the year over year that we've seen the growth happen. And whether that's a bad thing for the industry is kind of an interesting topic, or a good thing for the industry.
Well, I would like to chime in on the jQuery thing, because jQuery is included in a lot of softwares, and we're going to talk about a little bit of that too, but a lot of softwares that people use, like WordPress is in this list as well for this, web frameworks and technologies. And whereas, it's down the list, not super far, but it's further down the list than I would expect, it has jQuery in it. And there's a lot of other, tools, a lot of other frameworks, no code tools. The list goes on that are, jQuery friendly, have jQuery included, etc. And so there's going to be a lot of, kind of, again, like that might be a little bit of like a padding of the stats, right? Where if someone is working with, I believe Webflow even, I think now, don't quote me on that, but I believe Webflow has jQuery in it. And it like allows you to just like write up some jQuery. And like if someone's working in Webflow, they need to write like a little custom plugin or something like that. And then they, start using jQuery, like they could vote in this survey and say, oh yeah, like, I'm using jQuery kind of thing. And then, like assuredly that happens in WordPress as well. Where I remember like, just a couple years ago, there was some sort of news where it was like jQuery was being, I think it was updated or something within WordPress. And that was like a big thing because like WordPress is really all about, being backwards compatible with older versions and keeping those things alive. And so, jQuery, of course, was mega popular, and people keep saying it's kind of dead, but, is it? We kind of have, seemingly here, just to sort of, sum it up, at least the way I'm looking at it, is we kind of have Node and React sort of fighting here, because there's a note here that says that Node.js peaked in 2020 with its highest recorded usage score of 51%. Well, right now it's at 40.8%. Now I don't have the numbers in front of me that reflect the React score, but I wouldn't be surprised if React picked some of that up. And so, just to me, and this is a hypothetical, is I think that the Node.js and React are fighting, but then, jQuery is still living, and living good too. It's not, everyone thinks it's, it's done, it's this, it's that, but it's kind of everywhere.
Yeah, I guess the Node.js argument is like, I don't know if Node is specifically fighting React because they're used for completely different things, but a lot of like with jQuery, a lot of tooling uses Node.js in the backend, right? Like a Next.js, for instance, has Node as its backend part for actually serving the full stack application. Same with SvelteKit, same with Astro, like stuff like that. So there's a little bit of that going on as well with Node, what you talked about with jQuery. And it's almost like those top, I would say more than anything, React would be fighting with jQuery. And it's more of a conversation on like, because people are shifting to React, there's less requirement for jQuery, right? Because jQuery does essentially not the same thing as React. It does a much smaller subset of it, but it does help you in the same ways that React would help you. Plus React does some other stuff on top of it. So the shifting from jQuery to React is obviously something that happened a while ago. It didn't happen this year. It happened a long time ago, and that's kind of gone on. But a lot of people are still stuck. And I say stuck kind of like, I know some people still like jQuery and are fine with it. And for most smaller apps that don't require a ton of reactivity and stuff like that, there's nothing wrong with jQuery or like, Alpine.js and all these other smaller frameworks that do the same thing, but just on a smaller level. It's just for like, if you're stuck using jQuery on a very reactive application because you made that choice 10 years ago, those are the people that I think are suffering a little bit from this. And again, hint at the end of the episode where like the title of this episode, technical debt is the thing that's kind of grinding people down. I think this statistic specifically, the jQuery being so high up is part of that. Is part of that because people don't move on from old technologies fast enough. They're very reluctant to rebuild and solve the technical debt. And they're just like, because again, there's a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of really good reasons for being hesitant to just rebuild your entire system, especially if it's something you've been building for years and years and years. But that leads to these like older technologies that have been reworked and redone a little bit to be better and faster at the same things that it does, not being adopted as quickly as they should be, in my opinion.
Well, one thing I do want to talk about there is it's actually really good that you mentioned that, Node and React are for different things. Because like, I'm just kind of just looking at it from like an analytical mind, I guess, and just looking at the chart, I'm thinking, oh, they are kind of arguing or fighting for position in a way. It's not like these things are sentient, but it's important to note because like I said, WordPress is on this list at 11.8%, and WordPress is not Node.js, and it certainly is not React either. So these are just like web frameworks in tech. It's not like competing web frameworks in tech, which is a very good thing to note. And I also would like to kind of pull a thread there too, is that like WordPress is obviously, basically a blog builder, a website builder. And yes, I know it can be extended to many things, e-commerce, etc. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's more or less a website builder in some way, right? Whether you're building a blog or whatever. It kind of seems like, maybe web apps are becoming more and more popular and like websites are not. However, the reason why I mentioned this, because like that, my point that I just made is probably kind of obvious to you. But the thing is that the case? Because the people that hang around Stack Overflow are likely not WordPress devs. There's definitely going to be a lot of WordPress devs on here, no doubt. But a lot of WordPress sort of problems, fixes, conversations happen on more official channels, whether it's like usually it's a specific plugin, whether they have a support forum, whether it's on the WordPress website where, you go to the plugin and you say, hey, I have a problem here, things like that. Like a lot of those conversations sort of happen almost, let's just say, quote unquote, internally, for lack of a better way to say it. They happen internally on WordPress systems or WordPress plugin systems. And so I'm wondering, honestly, how much a WordPress dev would hang out on Stack Overflow, let alone answer a survey like this. So it's like, what type of dev are we getting? Like how many, like, the Node.js is out there, the JavaScripts, all those type of things. When I Google those type of issues, I land on Stack Overflow all the time. When I Google a problem with WordPress, at least the problems that I have, it's probably 60-40, where 60% of the time I end up on a plugin's official page and people are talking in a forum, in a WordPress forum. And 40% of the time, or even less realistically, I end up on Stack Overflow. So it's going to be like it could be influenced by the community a little bit there.
I think you're 100% right. I think there's definitely some bias, some influence based on what Stack Overflow is. I think if you consider yourself a web developer, you probably know about Stack Overflow. For example, like I think WordPress would be represented more than something like Webflow, for instance, if that was something that was possible to put on here. I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. Or some, a Wix or a Squarespace, like you mentioned. And so like those website builders probably are underrepresented here by a significant portion for no-code tools because they're not going on Stack Overflow at all, or they just don't care about this stuff. They're not part of this community. So there's 1000% some bias here, and you have to take that with a grain of salt for those kinds of things. And this is more like developer centric. So I think like a WordPress developer, more represented here are the people that are creating plugins or the people that are going into the, the WordPress and doing like custom templates and stuff like that. That's probably represented enough here. But the people that are just like, going on WordPress.org or .com, whatever it is, .com, I think, and just spinning up a site, probably less so.
There's also like the idea that, realistically speaking, a single website, depending on its complexity, can be spun up by one or two people, whereas a web app is oftentimes, again, not always, but oftentimes built by a team. And so you would have, even people who, like 6 people who are all working on the same app would come in here and maybe vote Node.js, or maybe they're using React for the UI. They would use, they'd vote React. Whereas one WordPress dev is building a whole e-commerce themselves, but built, of course, on the back of WordPress and a bunch of plugins. They're one vote here. So there is going to be a bit of, skewing in that regard too.
Yeah, good point. But just to move on here, we're going to talk a little bit about not just like people using stuff, but people preferring things. So for web frameworks and technology specifically, there's some interesting points on this chart where on one side of the chart is like a desired percentage. So people that want to use the technology that is listed. And on the other side of the chart are the admired side of the percentage, was people that are using the technology, how they feel about it, the sentiment about the technology from people that actually use it. So like one of the standouts here is actually Svelte, where it has a fairly high desired range, which is it's only at 11.3% or 11.5%. I want to make that clear, but that's in the scope of things. If you take a look at the chart, it's well within the top 10 percentile, and it has a very high admired rate of 72.8%, right? So it seems as it's being used more, that desired rate is still pretty high. As compared to React and Node.js specifically, they both have, of course, as we saw with the chart above, much higher desired rates, but they also have lower admired rates. They both are sitting in, like React is sitting at 62.2% admired, and Node is sitting at 64.2% admired. Again, compare that to Svelte 72. So this is an interesting one, but I do want to kind of point out the fact that, again, a lot of times the more people that use something, the more people will find issues with it. So it's the same thing of like having a product on Amazon with 10 reviews of 5 stars and a product on Amazon with 1,000 reviews at 4.5 stars. Like, the more people use it, there's going to be varying opinions, and that will bring down your score no matter what, right? Like, you can't appease everyone with a piece of technology, a product, anything. So I would say, might be a hot take, but I would say that React having 62.2% admired is actually very, very, that's a significantly higher mark than I would have ever imagined for React at that level of usage, and is a very good testament to how good the product really is. Like, I might like be like, okay, I like Svelte, I like the differences that it does, the different things that it does, but obviously the community at large is fairly happy with React. And this is another reason why I just don't see something like Svelte, Astro, even Vue.js coming and dethroning it anytime soon. Because even though they might do things better or whatever, they just don't do things differently enough. React is growing at a very fast pace. It's listening to its community, and it is becoming better and better with time, and it's still the king. So if you're again, this is another aspect of like, if you're looking for a job and you need that job as quickly as possible, regardless of what everyone recommends out there, like some people might love Astro, some people might love Svelte, some people might love Vue, and you're looking at influencers for your opinions. The reality is that React isn't going anywhere, and it's probably your best bet. This kind of proves it to me, and I say that a little bit reluctantly, because I'm kind of a Svelte.
Devs, this one's for you. I've got 30 seconds to tell you about Wix Studio, the web platform for agencies and enterprises. So here are a few things you can do in 30 seconds or less on Studio. Integrate, extend, and write custom scripts in a VS Code-based IDE. Leverage zero setup dev, test, and production environments. Ship faster with an AI code assistant. And work with Wix headless APIs on any tech stack. Time's up, but the list keeps going. Step into Wix Studio and see for yourself. Link in the show description and in the show notes. Well, React is also, a big piece of people's work environment as of now, and people are going to like be hired on the fact that they have React experience. Huge products are built on top of React. And so there's going to be sort of that, hey, we've already invested in this, we're going to stick with it. That mentality is definitely going to be around for, at least a long time, at least a few years. Anyway, I hope. Because I'm a person that doesn't really like change. So I'm always just like, hey, like, this is the way it is. Like, this is sort of the way it is. But, certainly like you can see how like things will get like stuck into a company's not identity, but like they get used to using the tool, they have experience with it. And even though, like you said, like the Svelte sort of desirability is at 72.8%, I wouldn't, you're not going to see Svelte suddenly shoot up, to that desirability rank in usage. I mean, you're not going to see that because like, a manager is going to be like, well, is React still good? Yeah. Okay. Why are we going to switch everything, migrate everything, move everything around? There's just too much sort of technical debt there, migratory debt, if you will, there. And it's just too difficult. So like React just has a good foothold is I guess what I'm trying to say. It has just a good foothold at the moment. It's sort of like Windows when I remember Mac like started climbing up and people were like, oh, Windows is done. Like that's what everyone loves, those headlines. This is dead. That's dead. This is done. You're done. This is over. And, all the rest of it. And, websites are done because AI is here. SEO is done. Google's done. Cars are done. Humans have legs now. It's just the headlines are ridiculous. And it's just, surveys like this, especially comparing them over the years, really show like things don't make huge moves often.
Absolutely. And it's a testament to the stuff that does come up and all of a sudden become big, right? Like when React came onto the landscape, the competition for it was like Angular and stuff like that. And obviously Angular wasn't it. Like we can say that, with statistics at this point being like, hey, Angular just didn't fill that void. React destroyed it. So, hats off to React. Moving on here, though, I just wanted to kind of touch on exactly what you just said, Matt, about like Windows and Mac and how this is a very small subset of the population. But even in that small subset of very techie people that some might say might prefer Mac OS, for sure, Windows is still number one for both personal use and professional use. So, for instance, Windows is right now at 60% personal use, and for 60% personal use and 47.6% professional use. And then the second to Windows is Mac OS at 31.8 for both. So, an interesting point from this one is people that use Mac OS personally will, I guess, often use it for professional at the same time. Whereas maybe for Windows users, a lot of people prefer Windows personally, probably due to gaming, but will use it less often for professional from that like little jump there. But it's an interesting one because the rest of them are actually pretty aligned. Ubuntu is at 27%. Android is a very big question mark why it's even here. Like what developer is using Android as their main operating system for development? But it's fourth here at 17.9% and 8.4% professionally, which is crazy.
I saw a viral, what I'd call viral post one time of somebody using an iPad to design websites in Webflow, which Webflow is, in my opinion, a very desktop app. So yeah. I think it might be people that either are stuck with an Android tablet or an Android device, or I don't know, maybe they just prefer it for some reason.
Yeah, I don't know what that is, but like I get like, okay, so I do know what it is. It's thin clients. It's most likely thin clients. So like you're using the Android device and you're remoting into like a GitHub workspace or literally a different machine of a different operating system that can actually handle development workflows and stuff like that. I doubt many people are actually like coding on the Android system, if that makes sense, because I just don't see that as a viable option. Like there isn't that many IDEs on Android that can do any sort of compiling or any sort of developer server stuff. Just even web development would be kind of iffy on it, let alone like anything that requires actual compilation. I don't know. It's just, that's a weird one for me. That's an outlier. I find it interesting that Windows is still number one by far. Doesn't surprise me, I would say, because I know like the penetration that Windows has is going to probably not go away anytime soon, if ever. Maybe a similar situation to something like React, like you said, Matt. It's good enough. Why would you switch from it when you're like, whole company's using it? Just not viable. Plus, it's cheaper. That's another big aspect of it. Like a Windows laptop is almost always going to be cheaper than a Mac, and there's more options and stuff like that.
I found this one really interesting. Windows subsystem for Linux as being listed as your operating system. Aren't you kind of using Windows then?
I don't really understand why this one is separate from Windows. I feel like it should be the same one. And I bet you people confused it as well. Like, I'm sure people selected Windows when they really meant Windows subsystem for Linux, even if it's like an option on the list.
You can install like a UI and stuff though in the Windows subsystem, right? Like I think I've seen somebody.
Yeah, you can.
So I'm curious, like whether people are using Windows, but then their work is actually in their little subsystem.
Which is how I used Windows before. Like before I switched fully to Mac on work, everything was, all my work stuff was in Windows subsystem for Linux. Not the UI side of things. So like I was like connecting to it through a VS Code that was running on Windows that remotes into the subsystem that automatically works because it's all made by Microsoft. But all of my like files were hosted inside the subsystem. All of my development work was done on the subsystem using like their shell and terminal and all that. Like all that was fully subsystem for Linux, and that was a pretty good experience, honestly. But like for the UI side of things, I don't think you can like have like Ubuntu UI pop up. What you can have is now apps that have a GUI and show up as a Windows app almost on your desktop. Just running in the background will be running on Linux with the GUI on Linux. But moving on from that, the next thing here I wanted to kind of touch on in the technology side of things is salaries, because I think this is kind of an important topic for a lot of people coming into the industry or people that are thinking about switching in the industry. And this is something that's changed significantly over the last couple of years. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is the top paying technology. This is an interesting one that Matt and I both have never even heard of before, which I guess like we're web developers kind of makes sense. But the top paying technology this year, Erlang. It's at 100,000 medium salary across the world. I don't know what it is. Have you looked it up while we were talking, Matt?
No, I haven't actually. I can do that now as you like talk here, but
yeah, sure. Yeah. Look up what it is, because I'm curious. But the next one after Erlang is Elixir, which is an interesting language. It's actually a really nicely written language. I believe you can use it a lot on the back end. A lot of these languages are like that. Clojure is a close third. So both Elixir and Clojure are close together, I think, from what they are as languages. A surprise for me is that Rust is pretty far down. I thought Rust developers would be much higher. I would have, if someone were to have been like, hey, what's the number one without showing me this chart, I would have guessed Rust. But Rust is somewhere like top middle pack, it's still high, but it's not as high as I thought. And the one that like is most relevant to us is TypeScript, and I believe that one is very much at the bottom. Or not at the bottom, but in the lower third of the chart at 60, comparing to the first place, it's at 65,907. It's kind of makes sense why this is the case, right? Because most likely there's just a lot more TypeScript devs than there are Erlang devs. So the subset, like the actual, there's probably a way wider range. So there's way more people in the junior side of things that are making less than 65,000. And there's maybe like a lot of people still making more than 65,000, but because of that wide amount of range and the most popular language, like it being one of the most popular languages, it's going to have a lower salary. There's just more competition. It's easier to hire a TypeScript dev than an Erlang dev, something that we've never even heard of. Did you figure out what Erlang is there?
Yes, I did. So Erlang is a practical, functional programming for a parallel world. But anyway, I have a better description than that. I just wanted to read their slogan.
Okay. That's a pretty good slogan, though.
So this is the official website, erlang.org. Under the What is Erlang? It says here, Erlang is a programming language used to build massively scalable, soft, real-time systems with requirements on high availability. Some of its uses are in telecoms, banking, e-commerce, computer telephony, and instant messaging. Erlang's runtime system has built-in support for concurrency, distribution, and fault tolerance. And I was talking to ChatGPT here, and one of the big apps that Erlang is or was used in, because I looked that up too, and apparently there's some people arguing over whether it's still used, but Erlang was used or is used in WhatsApp for some of their functionality. So Erlang's big. Big stuff.
Big stuff. So I guess if you're looking to get into a language that pays a lot and apparently has some demand, Erlang is it. Interesting. Very interesting.
Since it's used for chat
sounds
apps,
like a good language
Google is going to use... Google should really learn Erlang so they can add chat to every goddamn thing possible and then shut it down as quickly as possible.
They'll probably build their own Erlang and then shut that down too.
Oh my God. No.
Yeah, don't give them any ideas. Okay, so with that, let's move on to the next one here, which is change in median salary, which is, I think, much more interesting to talk about. This is kind of one that made some headlines. I'm going to talk specifically about JavaScript here because, again, that's more relevant to us, TypeScript, JavaScript. The 2023 median yearly salary for JavaScript was $74,034. The 2024 yearly median salary for JavaScript, $63,694. That's an over $10,000 dip in 1 year on median salary. That is actually kind of nuts. You know, some people were surprised by this, shocked by this. I'm not really shocked by this because we've talked about it in previous episodes. The market is a lot frothier than it used to be, is a lot more competitive from the sense of there's a lot of layoffs and a lot of developers looking for jobs. So obviously that will create a market, a more like, I guess, buyer's market for companies where they're able to get a lower price on a developer, and a worse market for the developer where they're kind of having to settle for lower salaries as they look for new jobs. So this is just JavaScript. It actually did go down across the board, I believe, for all jobs. Like an even bigger drop, I think, was Rust, which again, I thought was the highest, but from 87 to 67,000. So, you know, another 11K drop there. So there has been a significant drop in developer salaries throughout this year. I don't think that that is particularly surprising, but what that means is that for people that are currently have a job that they're maybe unhappy with, this is a bad time to switch, right? Like this is not the greatest year to make that jump. And there's probably going to be a lot less movement internally in the developer landscape of like company of a developer being poached by another company or leaving to go to another company because they're dissatisfied than there was in previous years.
What really sucks about this is like inflation's kind of out of control in a lot of places. And so like you're getting paid less and things cost more, the classic. And so like that really sucks. But no, I agree with you, Mike. Like, I mean, unless like I know that, you know, job hopping can get you really good deals, and in terms of your salary, it just kind of sounds like there may be less of those good deals around now, right? So then a lot of people are going to be kind of like hanging on to what they have. I'd like to know, like, I'd almost want like an economist's view as to what this means, because we're seeing a drop in everything that you have listed here: PHP, SQL. This is from 2023 median to 2024 median for all of them, yearly salaries. PHP, SQL, JavaScript, Bash Shell, or all shells. It says here C++, R, Python, C, and Rust. So it's like everything has dropped, but you know, I'd love to have like that insight or that knowledge to say like what's mean, right? Because we did obviously have sort of like a big boom during COVID, but like COVID's been quote unquote, you know, gone, not gone, whatever, but gone in terms of like at least here, not really affecting our daily lives anymore. We don't have lockdowns and stuff like that. So it feels like it's, you know, years and years away, like it's in the past, and for it to still be affecting it, I don't know if that's weird, good, bad, ugly. Are there too many developers? Like, what does it mean? Like, we almost need an economist to like come in here and tell us what's going on.
I think it's too many developers. I think an economist will give more insight into that, but at the end of the day, there was a boom in need of developers, and then there was now a back to the mean, right? Like a correction. And this is the correction. So the correction is pretty steep, like 10,000 in a year is a pretty steep correction. So maybe there's more to it than that. Like you said, maybe economists can shed light on it, but a correction was inevitable. This is that correction. I bet 5 years from now will be way above what the median salary is right now. So that's a personal bet. Don't take that as like, you know, financial advice or anything like that. That's just what I think. To round out this like tech discussion, we'll get into AI shortly. What I find interesting is the developer types, the people that identify as different kind of developers. So full stack is number one, and apparently that's been number one for a while now. Backend is number two. And what's kind of changed and is different now over the last few years is that front end has seen a rapid decline to the point where people that identify as students is higher percentage than front end developers, right? So front end, I don't know if it's less desirable. There's less work for it. There's just less opportunity in terms of like what languages and what you can do with it or people just are misidentifying themselves. I might be one of those people where like I identify as full stack, but I'm probably more of a front end, or I was more of a front end before that. And I was still identifying as full stack. Like, I dabble in the back end. I at this point, I'm probably more of a back end dev than a front end dev because I've kind of grown into that role. But a lot of people that immediately pick up something like Next.js and SvelteKit will start identifying as full stack, whereas maybe they should be still in the front end side of things. So that's what my guess is. But I don't know. Like, I guess there's just more opportunities in the back end. There's more to do, like connecting services and a lot of processing stuff, API development than there is in the front end. And front end is, kind of dying in front of our eyes. It's interesting.
Well, here's a question too, is like, as the amount of developers, like, our theory was that the amount of developers went way up and the demand, kind of there was that correction, like you said. So full stack looks a lot better than saying I only know part of the stack. So are many people being like, oh, I'm full stack? And no, I'm not saying they're necessarily lying. What I'm saying is that there's going to be less specialists and there's more generalists because you're able to apply to a wider variety of jobs. You're able to apply to back-end jobs, front-end jobs, DevRel even, full stack, like the list just goes on. And so like you're casting a wider net with your position or what you like sort of like career identify as, I guess, saying, hey, I know everything in the stack. I can help you with your databases. I can help you with your user interfaces. I can help you with your content, and content covering both sides of that, even because content's a big game and things like that. I wonder if that is a part of it too. But we've had the discussion before where it's like, if you use Svelte and then you add like SvelteKit, right? So you're using SvelteKit plus Svelte, whatever, however you want to identify that, or like say that you want to do that, you can say you're a front end or a full stack developer. So like maybe full stack developer is just becoming more accessible as well. And if someone is like really big on the front end, like they like the UI stuff, they're using, let's say, Svelte, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, just like that is their thing. Like that's the stuff they've learned. And then they learn like, oh shoot, like full stack is getting kind of big. It's like, all right, well then like maybe we could just do maybe I could just learn SvelteKit, which is not the biggest jump. And now I can say I'm a full stack developer.
I think that's exactly it. Like it's just there's an easier ramp to full stack these days than there was before. And that's why it's kind of being just jumped on. But with that, I kind of want to move on straight to AI. I'm just going to do a quick summary of some of these AI charts. I'm not going to go through all of them right now, but essentially the biggest one for me, I think, or one of the biggest ones is, are people using it? And the resounding answer is yes. 61.8% of people are using AI. Only 24.4% are saying they won't use it. And the rest of them are saying they aren't using it, but they plan on using it. So that means that, over 70% of developers are using or planning on using AI in the future. And that makes sense to me. I've used a ton of AI tools at this point. They're all of varying degrees of success, but for the most part, and this kind of goes into the next one here, they increase your productivity. Just period, increase your productivity. And the next chart is literally like 81% agree that using benefits of AI tools increases productivity. Period. So why wouldn't you use it? Well, the only reason to not use it is if your company is not going to allow you to use it. If your company doesn't, it has a security concern with AI and stuff like that. Those are the reasons like I would put to not using it. But if you're just a regular small startup, many security concerns about stolen IP or people using your IP, your code for, learning their algorithms or whatever, I see it as a no-brainer. You use it because it's that damn good. The other really interesting one for me is, are AI tools a threat to your job? That's the question that was asked. And again, an overwhelming 68.3% majority said no. And again, none of these really surprise me because I've been using GitHub Copilot since its beta release. I've been using Super Maven lately, which is another kind of GitHub Copilot replacement that's quick. We have a podcast episode on it, and they're good, but unless you know what you're doing, they're very shallow. And so if you're having issues with figuring out, architecture of code, if you're having issues with, knowing what to use to solve which job, it might guide you in the direction of that, but it probably won't completely solve those problems. And if you're relying on AI to do everything for you, you probably will get to a solution that might work. But as soon as you start to manipulate that solution in any sort of semi-complex way, adding an integration, for example, you'll quickly run into a wall where you haven't architected it correctly because you didn't think about that in the future. So the AI doesn't care about that. It architects it in one way and didn't account for it. And now you're having to rewrite your entire code just to integrate one little feature. That is a very common outcome of someone that relies too heavily on AI. So that's why, as like seasoned developers, the overwhelming majority of them are not concerned at this point in time about AI taking their jobs.
That and like the responses that you get, like I've definitely had a conversation, like just recently I was building out a custom thing for Webflow, and I reached out to ChatGPT for assistance basically, and it was suggesting some stuff and it gave me a thread to pull on, but I recognized that how it was doing it was pretty inefficient. Because I'm like, a developer enough-ish, I guess, or I have like enough of like an understanding of code to be like, hey, I feel like that is not really the way we should be doing it. So I kept pushing it in a direction. And it eventually was like, oh, I guess you could do this alternative way. And that ended up being much more efficient. But like, if I hadn't known that, I would have just been like, well, copy paste this code. Well, it doesn't work. I guess that's it, right? Like there's very little I could do to continue in that procedure. So like as of right now, no, but again, this is a brand new technology. So have we opened up like the gate here for exponential growth and this thing in 2 years is going to be doing everything for us? Who knows? We don't have those answers.
Exactly. And the last thing I want to cover in this podcast episode is the frustrations that people feel. This is the title topic, Developers Hate Technical Debt. And this one is really interesting to me because I didn't think that this was the case. This one kind of went outside of my expectations. So the biggest one is, are you satisfied at your current job? And 33%, which is huge, are not happy at work. 33%. And then the 47.7% are just complacent, leaving less than 20%, 19.3% that are actually happy at their developer jobs. So which points to the fact that people are just unhappy being developers. I can say that as a blanket statement and target the majority of the people that are currently in a developer job. They are not happy, or at best complacent, essentially.
Yeah, at best.
With being a developer, which is crazy to me because to me, like, if you think about it, developer jobs have been coveted for years and years and years because they're usually pretty lax in terms of like, you can show up whenever you want, you can leave whenever you want. Like the environment is fairly lax in that sense. A lot of it can be done remotely. So a lot of companies are still using part-time remote hybrid work, which is another, question on this. And it's still, hybrid work is still the majority. And you usually have pretty good pay. Like even though the pay dropped a little bit, like you still have pretty good pay. You have pretty good benefits. You have like, when you're at the office, you usually have like, ping pong tables and scrap. Like that's what a developer was presented as and is presented as currently. And to show that only 20% of those people are happy with their job, it's kind of a mind-boggling stat. Like that's a problem with the industry, a significant problem with the industry.
Problem with the industry, but I don't have numbers in front of me, but I hear that many people aren't happy with their jobs in general. Like, and just as like, and not just developer, not just tech, everything from, hospitality through factory workers, through tech, through everything. I hear that it's sort of just like a largely thing. And like, a lot of it is going to have to be because like, there's going to be some people that are purely money motivated. They get there and now they're upset. Like, right. They're not happy with it. Another thing is that some jobs take forever to get into. So you will not know what you're getting into until you get in there. And I know that you can do some research and like, first of all, it's hard to do that research. You have to find a developer, talk to them. What if you find the happiest developer in the world, right? Like, you're not doing like a huge survey like this is doing. And then if you finally get into the position, you're just like, holy, like this is awful. And it's like, well, then it's awful, right? Like, I mean, like what's going to change? What's going to happen? And also we just talked about the salaries going down. That could be a part of it. And we could also talk about how, like, it's probably going to be more difficult to find a good deal to switch jobs. Not always, but, it might be because of the median salaries being down. And realistically speaking, it's like, okay, like we have to like take that into consideration as well. Is like, if somebody is unhappy and they don't have a lot of opportunities to jump to, now there's less of an opportunity for them to potentially become happy.
Yep, absolutely. And that's the thing, like it is kind of down across the board, but I've heard that plumbers have a higher percentage than developers at this point. Fair enough. Next thing is like the reasoning behind this, like what's the most common frustration? And this one is another one that kind of blew my mind a little bit. Number one, by like double almost, is amount of technical debt. So developers apparently are unhappy at work, mainly because the code bases that they're working on are crappy and they have no way to get around that, which is, I mean, makes sense to me. Like I've worked in those code bases before, and it's kind of a drag because every change is, you're working with developer tooling that is old, that is slow. Any change you make can be really stressful because you don't know what it's affecting, because you don't have all the insight into the amount of technical debt that's in there. And then there's never time to actually fix that technical debt. That combination has made it so that technical debt is literally like destroying people's ability to be happy at their work. And as like time goes on, I feel like that's only going to get worse. So I don't see that happy at work number going up because technical debt does not go down, which is kind of scary. Like it
doesn't go down.
Like, I don't know what that means.
It could go down,
but it won't.
It won't. You're right. Like it like we have the technical power to change it, but we won't.
Yep. So yeah, I'm curious what everyone else thinks about that. Like, are you in a situation where technical debt is your number one concern at work? Let us know I run the Twitter at HTML Everything. Matt runs at HTML Things on Threads and on Instagram. Like, let us know, because I'm just curious what everyone's position is. I didn't realize that this was the case personally. I didn't think that we had a situation where we were this kind of screwed as developers, but I don't know, like maybe there's opportunity here to create something that helps with technical debt, some sort of something like a system or a protocol or something like that. Like I feel like managers, company owners need to take this seriously and try to remediate this problem, because if it's going to get worse, you're going to get less production out of your developers, and you're going to have an even harder time hiring people because people are going to burn out quicker. Like happiness is one of the highest things to help you not burn out. If you're if you're suck at work, or if you hate your work and you have a bunch of technical debt you're leading to, you're going to burn out everyone on your team. So with that, I'm curious to hear what everyone's thoughts on that topic.
For sure. And we actually do have an episode or two on technical debt, so you can go check that out in the backlog. I think they're fairly old now, potentially, so maybe it's due for an update. I don't really remember when we did it, so in my mind, it feels like it's been a long time ago, so maybe that's something that, again, we could update, or you could check out if you'd want to get more insight from us about technical debt. But I think that's it. Unless you want to add anything else, Mike, I'm going to run the old conclusion here.
Runner up.
Alrighty. Well, thank you for tuning in. That's been a bit of a snapshot, if you will, of the survey that Stack Overflow did in 2024. And I'll include a link, of course, in the show notes on htmlthethings.com, so you can go and check out the website that they have dedicated to the survey. And you can, kind of go and get your own insights and your own opinions and things like that. And if you want to support episodes like this, remember that we are on Patreon. That is patreon.com/HTML all the things. Check out the tiers and give that a go. And many thanks to our $3 tier patrons: Tim from the Web Hacker and thewebhacker.com, Jason from Geek Life Radio via geekliferadio.com, and Garrett Segal, Level Up Financial Planning via www.levelupfinancialplanning.com, Joshua via silvio.us, and Magnus from YesWeb via yesweb.se. And we'd also like to give a shout out to Michael LaRocca, a contributing author on htmlallthethings.com. Michael is the author of Self-Taught, the X Generation blog at selftaughttxg.com. Feel free to leave a comment or a review on the platform that you are listening to this on, and this outro will sign us off.
You've been listening to HTML All the Things Podcast. Web development, web design, and small business. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from this show. And we hope you appreciate that we talk to you like human beings. And we hope you had some fun. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit us up on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon at HTML All the Things. And on Twitter at HTML Everything. Until next time, this is HTML All the Things, signing off.